Yeah, sure. First of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share the work of our research group. My name is Donghai Liang. I'm associate professor working in the Gangarosa Department of Environmental Health at Rollins School of Public Health from Emory University. I am the principal investigator leading the environmental metabolomics and exposomics research group at Emory. We also call this group eMERGE. So the mission for the eMERGE group is really to advance the understanding of how ubiquitous environmental exposures, such as ambient and traffic-related air pollutions, forever chemicals, including PFAS, and other emerging toxicants such as phthalates and phenols. We try to understanding the health effects, how they impact human health, with the underlying trying to understanding the underlying molecular mechanisms. And we mainly focus on vulnerable population, including maternal and child health, and people with underlying existing conditions such as Alzheimer's diseases, dementia, cancer, and cardiovascular diseases. And we mainly use the cutting-edge exposure assessment coupled with both targeted and untargeted exposomics profiling and multi-omics technology. To be specifically, our work really revolves around characterizing the human exposome, mainly the totality of environmental exposures across an individual lifetime, and trying to elucidate the molecular mechanisms underlying the health responses to pollutants. We mainly use advanced single and multi-omics technologies coupled with cutting-edge targeted and untargeted exposomics profiling. My research group really strives to bridge the exposure science and disease etiology, providing some actionable insights to inform policy and improve public health. For this particular question, let me just highlight some of this really recently major funded study, trying to explain a little bit further what we are doing. The first study I want to highlight is called the OMIC PTB study. This is a major R1 study currently funded by the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. Here we focus on maternal exposure to traffic-related air pollution and their link to preterm birth, which is a critical health issue disproportionately affecting African American communities. Here we use a longitudinal cohort, which is a well-established cohort called the Atlanta African American Maternal and Child Cohort. We included more than 700 pregnant Black and African Americans, and we are trying to use multi-omics data, including epigenomics, metabolomics, and maternal microbiome profiling to uncover molecular biomarkers and pathways, bridging traffic-related air pollution exposure to preterm birth. And this work really aims to identify sensitive biomarkers, trying to advance our understanding of health disparity and provide some potential strategy for mitigating traffic-related air pollution exposure to improve maternal and child health outcomes. The next study I want to highlight is another R1 study that was recently funded by the National Institute of Aging. Here we try to investigate the role of ambient air pollution, particularly the fine particulate matter PM2.5, trying to understand its role in the development of Alzheimer's diseases and related dementia. This study addressed a critical question about the neurotoxic components of PM2.5 and the co-occurring pollutants such as nitrogen dioxide and ozone, and how the underlying biological responses in the brain would be triggered upon exposure to these ubiquitous pollutants. We will use untargeted metabolomics in both the blood and the brain tissues, trying to identify early biomarkers of air pollution-related neurotoxicity and to provide some crucial insights for Alzheimer's diseases prevention and informing the environmental regulations. And more recently, we are very excited to receive another major U01 grant in close collaboration with my colleagues, Dr. Anka Hughes and Dr. Thomas Wingo, where we received more than $11 million funding support from National Institute of Aging. So in the next 5 years, we will be conducting an in-depth analysis of molecular connections between PM2.5 toxicants and Alzheimer's diseases using multi-omics integration across diverse tissues. This include blood, cerebrospinal fluid, and brain tissues. And here we will leverage three diverse cohorts at Emory with longitudinal data and brain bank resources trying to elucidate how specific pollutants and their mixtures within PM2.5 will contribute to the risk of Alzheimer's diseases. And we anticipated identifying novel multi-omic signatures and distinguish environmental factors from genetic risk factors, and which will provide a comprehensive understanding of the environmental impact on neurodegenerative diseases. And in addition to our work on birth outcomes and neurodegenerative diseases, our research group also try to address other pressing challenges of understanding the link between environmental pollutions and other chronic diseases such as cardiovascular diseases and cancer, and specifically teaming up with the population health research at American Cancer Society. We have recently have a study funded called the Air Cancer Omics Study, which is supported by both the Emory Winship Cancer Research Center as well as the American Cancer Society, where we are going to use multi-omics integration of epigenomics and metabolomics to investigate how ambient air pollution components would contribute to lung cancer carcinogenesis. So this is just a very brief overview of the ongoing study that we are working on. In short, we are really committed to applying innovative analytical tools and integrated approaches to address pressing environmental health challenges. And with our focus on vulnerable population, hopefully using these multi-omics methods and the exposomics profiling, we will be able to uncover actionable biomarkers and develop some potential strategies to really mitigate this environmental health risk, ultimately improving public health outcomes. Thank you. This is a great question, and of course, there's many challenges nowadays in the field of exposome and precision environmental health. Many exposure scientists, molecular epidemiologists, and toxicologists are trying their best to figure out what will be the efficient ways that we can use to really deal with this complexity of environmental exposure data. So I can think about several ways that we may be able to use to potentially tackle these challenges. For example, when we think about air pollution exposure assessment, we could think about using the more advanced exposure assessment modeling. So here we could use the satellite remote sensing technique coupled with the land use regression and chemical transport models. So all these approaches with the powerful machine learning technique could really incorporate this high resolution satellite data, ground level monitoring, and meteorological factors to capture fine scale spatial and temporal variability of pollutants. So we have seen a major improvement of all this spatial temporal resolve model with the spatial resolution improved from a couple kilometers to 25 meters even. So this is very exciting. And another potential approach that we could rely on is really these multi-omics integrations. So we could potentially address this complexity of environmental exposure by integrating multi-omics data spanning genomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, lipidomics, and microbiomics, trying to uncover this molecular pathway responsive to diverse environmental exposure. And this multi-omics tool, which is really the focus of my current research, really shows great promise to really sensitively map this biological perturbation in different molecular layers, thereby creating a very comprehensive system level understanding of how pollutants will interact with biological processes. And of course, in the field of exposome and precision environmental health, we also need to think about mixture modeling approaches. Environmental exposure, oftentimes they occur as a complex mixtures. We are exposed to not just a single pollutant at a time. We are exposed to thousands or tens of thousands of chemicals simultaneously. So to really account for this complexity, we have tried to use advanced statistical tools such as BKMR, WQS, and QGComp to disentangle the effects of pollutant mixtures. And this mixture analysis with the future improvement in and advancement in the biostatistic and bioinformatics will really allow us to identify the key contributors to the adverse health outcomes while we're accounting for different interactions and collinearities within the exposure data. And I think we also need to think about longitudinal study design. A longitudinal exposure data interpretation with repeated measurement of both the exposure and biomarkers and health responses over time will really give us the power to distinguish short-term fluctuations from long-term trend. And then this will also help us improve the accuracy of exposure assessment, in my opinion. And I think another key way to keep in mind is to try to incorporate both the exogenous and endogenous signals. So using the target exposure assessment, we might be able to learn about the concentration for these exogenous chemicals such as metals, metalloids, PFAS, phthalates, and other organic and inorganic pollutants. But at the same time, if we can use this high resolution mass spectrometry based endogenous exposome profile, we will be able to learn about the endogenous biological responses, such as by looking at metabolomics. So this dual, both targeted and untargeted exogenous and endogenous perspective, we really strengthens the interpretation of how environmental exposure, both the external and internal exposures, will impact the health outcome. And I think to really fully adjust this complexity, we also need to rely on really valid validations in cross-cohort replications, and also use the in vivo and in vitro model to validate and see if we can observe any dose responses once we identify any potential molecular signatures that are indicative of the adverse health impact on the adverse health impacts associated with environmental exposures. And then we are also very excited about machine learning and AI. So these tools can really help us in selecting more sensitive features and reduce the dimensionality of the exposures that we are looking at. So I think these are all some of the key areas that I can think about where we can tackle the complexity of exposome, human exposure. Yeah, in my opinion, I think exposome is really critical in identifying the association between environmental pollutant exposure and specific health problems. So first of all, it can provide really a comprehensive exposome profiling. As we all know, exposome tools really allows for the assessment of the totality of different environmental exposures an individual can experience over their lifetime, both externally when we think about the ubiquitous air pollutants, those chemical exposure, and then also the internal exposure, such as when we think about the metabolites and the microbiota. So by mapping all these different external and internal exposure using exposome profiling, we can identify critical exposure and exposure time window that are associated with specific health outcomes, such as chronic diseases and respiratory conditions. And an example could be that in our study, using exposome approach, we really can identify specific components of PM2.5 and then link to different health diseases such as preterm birth, which is critical maternal and child health issues, as well as to other chronic diseases such as lung cancer and Alzheimer's diseases. And then exposome also use a lot of this so-called single and multi-omics techniques. In my opinion, multi-omics integration is critical to obtain the mechanistic insights. But by really trying to integrating genomics, epigenomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and lipidomics, we will have the chance to fully uncover these molecular pathways that are affected by different pollutant exposures. And these insights can further help bridge the gap between exposure and health outcomes by revealing how different individual pollutants or mixtures of pollutant will induce biological changes that lead to diseases. And for instance, for the past decade, my group had been focused on using high-resolution metabolomics, and we demonstrated that using this high-resolution metabolomics, we can really try to map and highlight these disruptive metabolites and pathway that are associated with both the environmental exposures and might potentially the potential patient in the human metabolome will lead to increased risk of a certain health outcomes. And I think the future is really promising when we can couple other omics layers such as epigenomics, proteomics, and lipidomics, where we can use all these multi-omics to pinpoint the biological responses related to the health diseases that are caused by environmental exposures. And I think, as I just mentioned previously, environmental mixture analysis are also very important by using these advanced statistical technologies techniques and methods such as BKMR, QGCOM, and WQS will really be able, we will really have the chance to disentangle these effects of the individual pollutants and understanding the interactions, like how this mixture will together add in a synergistic way or in other ways to lead to the adverse health effects. And this will really improve our understanding of what will be their contributions to the diseases. And I think exposome is also very powerful in identifying sensitive and vulnerable population. For instance, they can using an exposome, we may be able to identify some vulnerable population that are particularly sensitive to higher level of environmental exposure, such as children, the elderly, and the racially marginalized and understudied population. And this stratified analysis can also help us to address health disparity and tailoring some potential interventions for at-risk population by tightening the regulations. And then finally, I think, as I just mentioned before, using AI and machine learning model, this coupled with exposome profiling, these are very helpful to develop this so-called predictive risk modeling. So by integrating this exposome data with machine learning algorithms, we can really develop predictive models to understanding the disease risk based on environmental exposures. And this predictive model can further incorporate biomarkers, personal exposure data, personal wearing sensors, and environmental monitoring to predict the likelihood of developing conditions such as asthma, cancer, or neurodegenerative diseases. And I think this is a very exciting field for the precision environmental health. And yeah, I think that's my opinions. Yeah, so there's three major research directions that I'm really passionate about and trying to focus on in the near future. So one is really related to the biomarker development for early detection and risk stratification. So in the past decade, my group has shown that using both single and multi-omics technology, we are able to identify some very promising molecular signatures that are sensitive to environmental exposure, but at the same time can reflect why there's an increased risk for different adverse health endpoints upon exposure to these environmental pollutants. I want to advance this biomarker discovery further to identify and develop some early indicators of environmental exposure related diseases. So this needs to be done by leveraging the multi-omics data and then we also need to validate these potential molecular signatures and pathway in other independent cohorts, and also using in vivo and in vitro models, trying to see if there's a dose response curve before we can claim that we develop uh, these sensitive biomarkers. But I do think that this is a very promising research direction that we can go further, because so far in the exposome and environmental health research field, there doesn't seem to be a lot of sensitive biomarkers or specific biomarkers that we can use. So using this multi-omics technologies coupled with validation in independent cohort and in vivo and in vitro model, we might be able to develop some really exciting biomarkers for early detection and risk stratification, where we can help stratify individual based on their risk level and provide a window of opportunity for early intervention and disease preventions. Another direction that I really want to push forward to, especially for my group, is to focusing on use this cutting edge AI and machine learning models into the exposome research. Trying to identify patterns and causal relationship between complex environmental exposures, and trying to forecast and predict disease onset and progressions based on the individual exposome profile. And last but not least, I'm really passionate about the idea of using nutritional intervention to mitigate environmental exposure risk. Again and again, when we see that air pollution is really bad for different disease health outcomes, we cannot just tell the participant to move away from where they live because they have a higher residential exposure to air pollution. This is because we know that where they live is highly associated with their social economic status. So that's why I'm thinking about other actionable items that we can use to mitigate environmental exposures. And one of this is really one of my interests is really lies into exploring how dietary and nutritional intervention can serve as modifiable factors to counteract the effects of harmful environmental exposures. In my opinion, nutrition can really play a crucial role in modulating different biological pathways, metabolites, and lipids, and reduce the oxidative stress and inflammation caused by different pollutants. And for example, certain dietary patterns or supplements have already shown promise in mitigating the impact of air pollution on reducing the systemic inflammation, reduce the oxidative stress, and improve the lung function. I think all of this like nutritional intervention might be able to serve and offer low cost and accessible strategy for mitigating the environmental exposures among the at-risk populations. And yeah, I think these are the future direction that I feel quite excited about, that I also want to move my emerge group forward to. That's a great question. So there's 100 or more hot topics and cutting edge research area that exposome scientists are very interested in pursuing. Here are just a couple suggested topics that I think would be appealing to the audience from the Journal of Exposure Assessment. So one is centering around the advancement in multi-omics integration and exposome research. And as I mentioned before, AI and machine learning application in exposome research could be another very exciting topic. And another potential topic could be centering around exposure and health links across the lifespan, because we all know that exposome really accounts for the totality of exposure across life. There might be some also topic that might be interesting to your readers, such as intervention strategy, talking about the policy impact of different environmental regulations. We all know that climate change and the current climate crisis is a very important topic. And so is the emerging exposures, such as all these legacy and novel PFAS, forever chemicals, phthalates, microplastics. And I think in general, readers will also be very interested in methodological innovations, such as like advancement in mixture analysis or additional advanced modeling and exposure assessment. I think these are all very appealing topics for the journal to consider. And then in terms of how we can attract like high quality manuscript, I think the editorial team in your journal has been doing an excellent job in attracting high quality manuscript. Um, just some other suggestion could be that you can come up with special issues on some of these emerging topics that I just mentioned. And then try to work with engaging early career researchers to enhance the visibility of this journal in the field and to collaborate with professional societies such as the International Society of Exposure Science, the International Society of Environmental Epidemiology. Both ISES and ISE has been very engaging in promoting exposure science and environmental epidemiologies, and also to promote cutting edge exposome research. And another way that you can really make this journal more high impactful could be to use transparent and more efficient review processes and trying to include more diversified article types, such as papers that specifically focus on data resources and methodological development, or think about some policy briefs or perspective articles.